All right, all right, all right, all right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am James Oliver Jr., co founder of the world's cutest twins, husband to an amazing wife, managing partner of Kabila Ventures, a new venture firm coming soon, investing in Overlook founder teams, and CEO of Kabila, which connects Overlook founders to capital, customers, and co founders. All right, so tell us where you're coming in from in the comments. We got a great topic for you here today. And please share this on your social media channels so we can invite your friends and to join this important conversation. Also, as we get into this, please drop your questions in the comments and we will do our best to get to all of them. Quick update, somewhere I'm wearing my favorite t-shirt, Get You a Therapist. Doing that because well, you probably need to get you a therapist, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I recently launched the Kabila Founder Mental Health nonprofit fund with a $25,000 grant from Techstars co-founder Brad Feld. And this is our third week, and we are paying for mental therapy for a third founder who wants it but can't afford it. So super excited about that work. More to come about that. And so what do we got? So today, what do we got for you today? So many startups launch as an LLC, and many of them want to compensate advisors and co-founders with equity, but they don't know how to do it. So we have a treat for you today to help you with this. We have the homie and my attorney, Abraham Williamson here, startup attorney extraordinaire. Abraham moderates a channel in our Kabila community where you can ask him anything about your startup legal issues. And guess what? He actually gets back to you. He's an awesome, awesome human. So welcome, Abraham. What's up, baby?
What's going on? It's good to be back. Enjoy what you're doing in the community. And they have been asking some really great questions. And I like the fact that everybody can see and benefit from the exchanges back and forth. So I'm looking forward to this topic because it's kind of come out of nowhere and exploded with interest because a lot of people are attempting to do this now. As I think you have been making an impact because people are starting to see that, venture capital from the really big companies are just one component of capital, and that you may be an LLC longer than you think. So how do you deal with that reality?
Okay, cool. So Abraham's going to share 3 tips to help you think through the challenge of having your startup registered as an LLC, but wanting to figure out how can I compensate people with equity, in terms of co-founders and advisors. So let's get right into it. Abraham, like what's tip number one?
Sure. So we have to start with drawing the distinction between C corps and LLCs. So the first tip is to understand what a profit interest is in an LLC. And I'll just ask you, just so we can set the James, do you know what a profit interest is? Have you heard the term? Do you are you familiar with it?
Profit
What do you
interest. Well, my understanding, because
profit
my first startup back in the day was an LLC, and it's essentially a pass-through entity. Is that what you mean?
That is correct. That is correct. And because it's a pass through entity, anybody who you give quote unquote sweat equity to is technically a partner in your business. They're a member just like you are, which may seem like how it is in a C Corp, but because you're issuing stock, you can kind of carton off the employees and the contractors into this pool or this plan. But it doesn't really work that way in an LLC. If you are a partner and you're a member, you're going to be responsible or have a share of whatever the profit that business has. So, what a profit interest is it narrows down the equity that is being granted. What do I mean by that? When you start your LLC, you are either putting money into it or assets, etc. You have a capital interest in that business. You have a capital contribution. There is a set amount, regardless of what it is, that establishes that you own that business. But that's just a part of the equity. A profit interest is saying that you have an interest in that business, but it's not a capital interest. What does that mean? That means if you dissolve the company or you were to sell off the assets of that business, just the assets, that only the people with a capital interest would have a right to that. Somebody with just a profit interest wouldn't. A profit interest also can carve out management rights, because if you think about it, if you're a member in an LLC, unless it's explicit that you don't have voting rights, you also have the right to manage and vote in that LLC if it's a member managed LLC. And I know we're getting technical, but we have to understand what a profit interest is right out of the gate. So a profit interest is established by creating a new class of member in your LLC that explicitly states that it doesn't have a capital interest. It may or may not have a management or voting interest, and that it has solely a profit interest. And that profit, like, why are we doing this? It's more complicated. What is the benefit of this? Well, like many things with an LLC, it revolves around taxes. If you're in a C corporation and you issue sweat equity to your employees, your contractors, when you issue them that equity, you're really selling them a security, but they're not paying cash for it. They're paying their services for it. And the IRS typically is going to view that as compensation. So if you issue them $50,000 in stock in that C corporation, from the IRS's perspective, that's considered $50,000 in cash, and they're going to tax that. Now, there are ways to deal with that issue, but in an LLC, if you were to do that, now you're dealing with that same issue. But because it's an LLC, it's a little bit more flexible. And if instead you issue a profit interest, because there's not a capital interest component to it, the IRS kind of views that as a non-taxable event if set up properly. And we'll get into the specifics of that a little bit later. So the big benefit is that you can have an LLC and issue sweat equity without granting that person this huge tax bill because you issued them the grant. That being said, those profit interests, like, what, how do they actually get the money out, right? Like, what does it mean? What's the value to them? Well, in two ways. One, because they have a profit interest, at the end of the year, if you issue distributions or there's profit that's recognized, they get their percentage of that, right?
So this is for so like in a C corp, if you're giving advisors equity, they don't have any profit interests, or do they? How are you viewing that relative to a C
Um,
corp?
They don't, because a C corporation is a taxable entity, right? So
Right,
that profit is held in the corporation unless it leaves the corporation, and it leaves the corporation through a dividend. And as you're well
right,
familiar, VCs and most investors don't really want you to distribute dividends because they want you to
right,
reinvest that money
right,
back into the business so that it can grow. And the corporation is paying taxes on that profit already in the business. But in an LLC, that profit isn't taxed until it reaches the members.
right. Hey, Liberty. Just again, if you guys are out there, just drop in the comments. Let us know where you're coming in from, and we will do our best to get to your questions. I know we're getting kind of technical here, so drop your questions in the comments there, and we'll do our best to get to the questions. So, Abraham, so so you mentioned that if you set up the profit interest, then if there's a distribution of profits, they will get a portion that. Can you set it up similarly like a C corporation in that they wouldn't necessarily, because look, at the end of the day, it's want to be able to give them equity in the company, but can you do it without having to distribute them profits? If I distribute profits to myself, if I was a managing member of an LLC, or do they
Yeah,
have to get a share of the profits too?
yeah. So that is
Mhm.
this is more of an accounting question than a legal one. But what I will say is that if there's profit that is shown, they may or may not be taxed on it, whether or not they actually receive it. But that's more of an accounting question. I think the big question is also, well, when do they get taxed? Let's say there is no profit, or you find a way not to give them profit every year. Well, how do they get the value out of it? Well, then we shift over to a liquidation event when you actually sell that
Well,
LLC.
well, yeah, that's the whole point, right? If you set it up in a
Right.
C corporation, those people get compensated if there's a liquidity event. So
Correct.
that's kind of what I was going at with my question. How you just set it up if somebody wanted to just compensate them if there's a liquidity event?
Right. Well, that profit interest entitles them to profit in that situation as well. But what is interesting is that you establish what's called a liquidation threshold. And that liquidation threshold sets a high watermark that has to be met before their profit interest entitles them to a portion of the proceeds from that sale. What do I mean?
Okay.
Let's say that when you issue them the profits today, you value the company at $1 million.
Mhm.
That becomes the liquidation threshold. And when you sell the business for $10 million, The first million goes to the founders or the class A members or the investors or whoever else in the business has a capital interest.
Hmm.
They receive a portion of the first million. And it's only after that liquidation threshold is met that the profit interest kicks in. And if you've given them 1%, let's say, then they get 1% of the profit between 1 million and 10 million. And that is when they pay the tax. And hopefully, if it's structured properly, they will be paying capital gains taxes instead of ordinary
Right.
income tax, which is why
Right.
people really like these profit interests.
Right. The difference between the two is, 20% capital gains tax versus, 28% or higher in a marginal. What is the ordinary income tax rate now? Is it
Again,
28%?
this
Or is
is
it depends? It ratchets up based on your income.
well, it depends. And this is more of an accounting question, but you have
Yeah.
short-term
Sorry.
capital gains, which is basically more like ordinary income. And then you have long-term capital gains, which is
Right.
that lower rate that's often negotiated
So
back and forth.
20%. Is that what that is?
Yeah, typically it's going to be, 20 or 21.9. It kind of it shifts and varies. But I would say
Okay.
if you're in the highest tax bracket, you often prefer, the capital gain, especially long-term capital gains.
Right. 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 Right.
So
Okay.
that's
So
the
Libby.
first tip.
So Libby
And
said technical. This is good. Great breakdown, Abraham.
I'm glad. I know we're getting into the weeds here. And this is why a lot of people kind of shy away from this because it seems complicated, but the impact to the people who are receiving is huge, right? If you can save somebody this huge tax bill up front, they're going to like it, right? And if you set it up properly, it's just a rinse and repeat, and you can do this at scale. Now,
Oh, okay.
the
Cool.
second tip is to understand a guaranteed payment. And a
Hey,
guaranteed
Abraham, before you go
yeah,
into that, this is a question here. Can I drop this question or you want to
sure,
finish that point
sure.
first? All
No, no,
right.
no. Go ahead. We're moving on. Go ahead.
So CW Minifield says, I have an LLC, but I need some type of C corp. I guess he says he's been told he needs some type of corporation, C corp, S corp. He doesn't really know what this is and why I should do it. What are the perks slash cons or pros and cons? Also, can I convert my LLC to one of these? I know for sure you can convert your LLC to a C corp because I did that when I went through Generator back in 2013. I was in Wisconsin, incorporated as an LLC, and then we converted it to a C corp right before we got into Generator, so we could take on investment capital from an angel investment group and some venture firms. So,
For
but please,
sure.
Abraham.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So accountants love S corps. They love S corps. So I'm not surprised that was recommended, and they love it because when you're an LLC, you're subject to self-employment tax, and if you've ever worked a job, you kind of see one half of that, right? Like when you get your payroll taxes and you see that they take out for Social Security and for Medicare and you see those payroll taxes, you're paying half of that. Your employer is paying the other half. But when you're an LLC, you pay all of that, which let's say it's 15.3%. You're paying all of that. But if you're an S corporation, your accountant will likely be able to only have you pay that tax on a portion of the income that you take out of the business, which is why they love S corp. They divide some of the income you receive essentially as a distribution, and the other side as income that's subject to the self-employment tax. There are different rules around that. You can't go all distribution to avoid the tax entirely. It has to be reasonable based on what people are paid generally in your space, but that's why they love S corporations. And so yeah, I'm not surprised they recommended it. But that typically is going to be an issue if you're interested in a high growth company that's taking on outside investment for a few reasons. One, you're limited in how many shareholders you can have. You can only have 100. That may not be an issue now, but as you grow, it could be an issue. The second issue and why that wouldn't work with a profit interest is because you're also limited to only one class of stock. Everybody has to own the same type of stock in an S corporation. And three, you cannot issue stock to an entity because you may remember back in the day, former president candidate Mitt Romney made this statement saying, "Hey, corporations are people," right? And that's true under the law. But S corporations specifically say it doesn't say person; it says natural person. So only individuals in in a handful of trusts are able to receive stock in an S corporation. So if you are in an accelerator like you've been in, James, or you are taking on investment from VCs, like from an entity, or somebody wants to have their LLC invest or LP invest in your business, they can't do that in an S corporation. So that's why it typically doesn't work in this scenario. Can you convert? Yes, but you often wouldn't because of that. For a C corporation, you can absolutely convert from an LLC to a C corp. But what we often see is that because of the accountant's paradigm around putting you in the best possible position, people often wait until the last possible minute until they convert into a C corporation for that reason. But that can also backfire because of a different tax rule. And this is why accountants are so crucial in this space, is because uh, outside investors and quite frankly founders care a lot about this provision, section 1202 in the tax code. What is that? That is the qualified small business stock exemption. And it's something, if you ever sign with the big investors, they're going to require that you represent that you qualify for this. And what does it mean? It means that you are exempt from the first 10 million of gains on the value of your stock, or 10 times the investment amount, whichever, I think it's whichever is greater. So obviously VCs and others and you as a founder are going to care about that. If you exit for 100 million and you don't have to pay capital gains on the first 10 million, you're in a much better position. But one of the requirements for that is that you are a C corporation. S corporations and LLCs don't count, and you have to have held that stock for at least 5 years. There are other requirements, but those are the big ones on why right out of the gate, or as early as possible, who are planning with the end in mind, they start with the C corporation. So hopefully that answers your question, but ask a follow up if there's more to
As you can see, Abraham geeks out on this stuff.
it. I love it. I can't help it.
Hey, Kimberly. But it's like I said, we Abraham's in our community. You could join our community, and he has a space called "Get Your Legal Questions Answered," and you can drop questions in our community. If you just go to kabila.mn.co, join our community. In addition to that, we're providing free mental therapy to one founder a week right now, and we're raising more money for that nonprofit, and we'll be doing more. We're going to pay for mental therapy for 50 founders over the next 12 months. And but tap into our community, and you could catch up with Abraham there as well. Charles, did that answer your question, fam? I just want to make sure you got your question answered that you asked us here. I'll wait for you to respond. And Liberty says she loves the geekery. All right, just to reset, y'all. We're talking with this is my attorney and my good friend Abraham Williamson. He's a startup attorney, has his own firm, talking about how to compensate co-founders and advisors with equity if your startup is an LLC. Because most of the startups, going through accelerators, like back in the day, I went through Generator. More recently, I went through Techstars, and those organizations were LLCs. So, but this is a question that Abraham says that he's seeing more and more and more. So we just want to take the time to try to help you get your questions answered around this. So Charles says it does. Thank you, Charles. Please drop your questions in the comments, and please share this on your social channels. This is an important conversation. We want to reach as many people as possible. So we have a question here from Kenneth. Appreciate the thorough explanation on that C Corp to LLC question. Yeah, of course, Kenneth. We appreciate you for hanging in with us and hanging out with us. Please share this conversation with your followers on your social media channels. All right, so I cut you off on your second question, your second point, Abraham. Please continue.
You're good. We're moving right through, and I want to shout out Kenneth as well. You and he have excellent content on your podcast, so I would just plug that for both of you as well. But the second tip is to understand guaranteed payments. Now, this one requires a bit more of decision making to weigh the cost benefit. So, what is a guaranteed payment? If you are a member or a partner in your LLC, you're going to make distributions, right? But your distributions are not tax deductible to your business, right? Like, yeah, I believe you've had some LLCs, James, yourself. Like when you distribute it to yourself, that is income to you. It's not a tax write-off for the business, right? But it's also discretionary. A guaranteed payment is a payment that is made that is tax deductible to the company, but that's because it operates similarly to a salary, but it's different. If you are attempting to compensate somebody as W two and you're paying them with the salary, that's one way to do it. But if they are a member and you also want to get them cash, um, you can do it through a distribution or you can do it through a guaranteed payment. And that is saying that instead of us being discretionary, we're going to obligate the company to pay you a certain amount in the year. Why would we do that? Well, for one, now it's tax deductible, but it is ordinary income to that member who is receiving it. And we were talking about that self-employment tax earlier. um, that person is still going to be subject to self-employment tax on that, but not maybe not FICA because it's not a W-2, but they're still going to have to pay the self-employment tax, but they will be able to deduct half of that self-employment tax, subject to their discussions with the accountant. Everybody's tax situation is different, and I'm not an accountant, or don't give tax advice. I don't do tax returns for anybody other than myself, and even then I hire a professional. But that is the benefit of a guaranteed payment. That's another option that people will use to compensate people who are working in their business, but it's not viewed often as well as the profit interest because it's an obligation of the company to shell out cash. So it's seen as an expense on the balance sheet. So that's the second tip. If you're toggling between, salary guaranteed payments, that's another option that you have. And then the third tip is to engage an accountant and a lawyer. This is not something you want to do yourself. And I will give you two specific provisions that you can go look up and learn about this more. Because when this first came onto the scene, there was a question about how it was going to be treated by the IRS. So there are two revenue procedures that have been published that allow us to do this. And when we set this up for companies, we put this specifically in the operating agreement to show we are satisfying these things. The first one is IRS Revenue Procedure 9327. What is that? That is the procedure that allows it to be a non-taxable event. If you intend for it to be treated as a profit interest and you include that language in your operating agreement, then it's sort of considered a safe harbor. The second revenue procedure is IRS Revenue Procedure 2001-43, and this one will have a little bit
Bro,
more.
the fact that you remember all these numbers is like blowing my mind.
Look,
It's crazy.
I love that. I have it written down, and you should too, because this is a very technical stuff. But um, this is the revenue procedure that establishes valuation and how valuation should be treated. Because just to as an aside, in C corporations, back in the day, companies and the board of companies used to determine the value of a company when they issued stock to employees. That was obviously fraught with issues and
Right.
potential abuse by people who wanted to do
Right.
that. That's where we get this whole concept of 409A valuation, which simply means that you can try to do it yourself. But if you're
Right.
ever challenged by the IRS, the onus is on you to show that what you did was accurate and right. And if you're wrong, you're going to pay a penalty for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go to a third party, that third party, as long as they conduct it properly, and the main thing is that they sign it, because if you get a valuation from a company and it's not signed, it could be challenged by the IRS later. So just make sure that it's signed. That valuation is seen as valid by the IRS. They're not really going to question it. It is considered a safe harbor. So in the LLC context, though, there's not the same requirement to go to a third party. This revenue procedure essentially establishes that it has to be reasonable. So the onus is still on you, but it's probably still a good idea for you to go to a third party to get a valuation on that profit interest, again, to establish the liquidation threshold. And that liquidation threshold also kind of protects you as the founder because it sets a watermark. If you don't sell above a certain amount, then that profit interest doesn't have any value because you have to achieve a certain exit threshold. You basically have to get the value of the company before they became a member, before they get paid anything. Otherwise, it's not really considered profit. So I know today was very technical. We ran through these concepts: profit interest, guaranteed payments, and then the two IRS procedures. But if you have a question or if there's something you're dealing with, or if you're still maybe intimidated by it, we can, spend the rest time having the conversation about what it could look like for you.
Yeah. So we got 5 more minutes. If you have a question about any of that, y'all, please feel free to drop it in the comments. And also, like, join our Kabila community. Like, Abraham hangs out in there. He has a space he moderates, and people are dropping questions in there, and he gets back to you. And it's pretty dope that he does that and he provides that resource for you. So you could also visit his website here, abrahamjwilliamson.com. To connect with you, is your email the best way for them to do that, Abraham?
Yeah, it's Abraham at abrahamjwilliamson.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and we'll get back with you. Either of those two will work just fine.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Perfect.
I thank you for providing that community because you'll give me a nudge as well because I miss it sometimes. And James is like, hey, you got a question there and we can hop in. And the questions are usually pretty good. And people who are already working with counsel may have a question. It's, I'm not trying to just
Yeah.
make everybody my client. It's really,
Yeah.
for James because of all that he's done. And it's my way of sort of giving back in this small way. So please do ask those
Yeah.
questions. I love
But
responding.
also, like, it's smart, right? If you're helpful and if people actually need help and they need an attorney, they're going to come to you because you were helpful. It's just basic kind of give first common sense, right?
Yeah, and I kind of learned this from you as well because if I can say this, James, you really press me, especially early on being clear, right? Because as lawyers, we have a tendency to drag on, and you're like, "Hey, what is the answer? Get to the point. Like, what do I need from my perspective?" And now that I'm a business owner myself, I understand that even more. So I think people sometimes just want like clarity, and that's what the
100%.
it provides an opportunity to provide.
Yeah, 100%. So go to kabila.mn.co, join our community, and you could stay engaged with Abraham there. And I appreciate the kind words there. I forget the context of what that was all about, but I'm sure it was a funny story. Yeah, because we met after COVID when I started the Parentpreneur Foundation.
It
So,
was at sort of I think it was the beginning. I wanna say that was, like, maybe April, May 2020. I mean, it was early in COVID. I don't even
yeah,
think we really were calling it COVID back then. It was that
yeah,
early, so
yeah. So hopefully this was helpful, everybody. If you have another question, please feel free to drop it. But it sounds like the thing that founders can do to trigger all this, and you correct me if I'm mistaken here, Abraham, is to set up that profit interest and structure in a way that you want. So, with the threshold and all those other things you were talking about. Is that right?
for sure, and it seems like a lot and intimidating, but we can help you to sort of streamline it. The main thing that you want to kind of the work to do is what is the liquidation threshold going to be, or how are you going to approach that? And then also, how much profit interest are you going to give, and is there a vesting schedule? You can still do those things with this profit interest and make sure
Oh,
that
wait, you can set up a vesting schedule? Oh, man, you holding out on the good stuff, bro.
yeah,
Wait, what?
absolutely,
Oh,
absolutely.
you can set up
So
a vesting schedule with an LLC by setting this profit interest. Wow.
yes, yes, you can. And because what controls these interests is the operating agreement. So we amend the operating agreement to bake this in,
Can
but
you
you
add
can
a cliff
also,
too?
yeah, you can have a cliff because you'll also have
Oh,
a profit interest agreement. I mean, we've called it different things because some people may say they want to call it a sweat equity agreement or a profit interest agreement or a unit interest agreement or what have you. But you can set that up and have a vesting schedule in there. We often will mirror what you are seeing in the C Corp. So, like a 4 year with a 1 year cliff, et cetera. Some people want to do milestone payments in there as well. So, you can really
amazing.
make it creative and flexible. Yeah,
Love it. Love it. Okay, that's cool. So that's very much like a C corporation in terms of giving equity to co-founders and advisors.
sure. Yeah, yeah,
Amazing. That's amazing. So I'm also part of this other group called the Fourth Effect, and they do a lot of stuff about bringing advisors on to startups and stuff. I'm going to share this replay in there because I know
okay.
there's also a bunch of startup founders in there who probably have LLCs too. So this was amazing. We are about out of time. Do you have to hop right now at the bottom of the hour here, or do you got it a second, Abraham?
No, I have some time.
Okay, so I'm gonna close this out. Everybody, and we're just hanging out. I'll talk to you in the green room here. But everybody, if you want to catch up with Abraham, his email address, Abraham at abrahamjwilliamson.com. His website is abrahamjwilliamson.com. And come hang out, join our Kabila community, right? He hangs out there, he moderates a space. You can just pop in there and ask him questions there. And as I mentioned at the top, I'm providing free mental therapy for founders with my Kabila Founder Mental Health Fund. So you could go to go.joinkabila.com/therapy, learn about that, make a donation, it's tax deductible, it's nonprofit work. We're doing God's work over there. So we appreciate everybody for joining us today. And Kimberly said, we love Abraham. Yes, what's not to love about Abraham? We appreciate everybody. We'll catch you next time. Y'all be good, all right? Later. Hang on, stand by, Abraham.
Okay.